Hi, everybody, and welcome. I just wanted to take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Rhoda Shapiro. I am the founder of the Milpitas Beat, which is a print and online newspaper in Milpitas, and I'm very happy to be here tonight. First, I would like to go over the code of conduct tonight with all of you. We want to thank our partners at Create TV San Jose for joining us this evening. And as you can see here, they are going to be videotaping tonight's forum. So the video recording of the forum will be made available on the SV at Home's Action Fund website, and you can find that at siliconvalleyathome.org/action-fund. And we want to thank our audience for being here and for attending tonight's forum, and ask that you refrain from any disruptions while Create TV is video recording. So we ask our audience not to clap or boo or disrupt candidates while they are responding to questions from the moderator. So audience members deemed to be disruptive may be asked to leave. I just wanted you to know that. And we will be taking questions from the audience as well. I'm sure all of you have received the index cards before coming in. So if you do have a question, be sure to fill that out and hand it to somebody, because you're going to have an opportunity later to have those questions read. We're going to be checking those and ensuring that any duplicate questions will definitely get priority, and they will definitely be answered. And if we don't get to your question tonight, just rest assured that we're going to be forwarding the questions to the candidates for them to respond at a later point. And we're going to be sharing all of those responses with the audience via email. So thank you so much for your cooperation. So the first thing we're going to be doing is start with our opening remarks from our candidates. And just going down the line, we have Mr. Alex Lee here tonight with us. Thank you for being here. Mr. Bob Brunton, Ms. Anna Song, Ms. Natasha Gupta, and Mr. Jim Canova. So thank you all for being here tonight. For this first one, you're going to get 2 minutes to respond. And I just ask that you introduce yourself, give your welcoming remarks, and also tell us a little bit about your first housing experience. We're going to start right here with Mr. Alex Lee.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Lee. I am born and raised in Assembly District 25 in the communities of Milpitas and Northern San Jose. And I am running for Assembly District 25 because of my legislative experience. I've worked in the state Senate and the state Assembly, working on many issues, including housing and transportation, which I'm very passionate about. I'm quite a numbtot myself, personally. And I've also been endorsed by the California Young Democrats. And what was the one question that we're supposed to? Oh, what is experience with housing, the first one. So my first experience in the rental market was actually in the city of Davis, where I was student body president at UC Davis. So funny enough, UC Davis suffers from the worst of the housing crisis, in that there is high rents and very low scarcity. In fact, that they build barely nothing. So in fact, there was a lot of demand and pressure being put because the city literally was building nothing. So students were commuting all the way out from Woodland or Sacramento to actually get an apartment. And funny enough, to get an apartment, you need to be on a wait list a year ahead of time, which was, funny enough, all the students that went to Davis learning how to do housing there went to other cities and was like, oh, don't you have to apply for housing a year in advance? Like, no, that doesn't work like that in other cities. So that's how screwed up it is in that scenario. But knowing from that lens how dire the housing crisis is, in our campaign, we've already knocked on over 10,000 doors, and every single family that has expressed and talked to us, their top priority or top concern is the housing crisis. Whether it's 4 generations living in the same household to get by, or the renters paying half their income, or there are seniors on fixed incomes, everyone is concerned about the future of a housing crisis, and I'm looking forward today to talking more about my vision for a public a publicly led vision when it comes to housing. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Bob Brunton. Thank you for letting me be here with you today. Just a little background about me. I've been in the area for 30 years. I served 12 years as an elected official, Loney Community College trustee, 30 years of business ownership as well in the city of Fremont. The purpose of my campaign is all about solutions, not excuses. The 4 basic areas that I'm going to be focusing in on is improving education, improving mass transit, improving civil justice, and maybe the most important, improving the way our government treats us. Now you might say, well, Bob, this is a housing session here today. But the reality is all four of those are so critical part of the housing equation. You can't talk about good housing without talking about education, and you can't without mass transit. So today I'll be covering a lot of those different areas, I hope. They asked me to talk a little bit about my first experience for houses, and one of the reasons why I'm running, because I came from a different era. When I was 16 and I started working at Sears, at age 18, I was full-time. And then I became a full-time student at Colorado State University. And I was able to graduate in 4 years with a degree, with no debt, and a little bit of money to put aside, which I used as a down payment to buy a condo in Fremont and got married. And then, now, a few years later, I moved, we had 2 babies, and I've lived in the same house for 30 years, so I've had some benefit of Prop 13 as well. So I understand housing from a little different direction. So today, we're going to be talking about some bold solutions I have, as well as ideas people have told me. So I look forward to our conversation. I am Bob Brunton. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Anna Song. Thank you for having me, and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm currently serving as a Vice President of Santa Clara County Board of Education. I'm a first-generation immigrant. I was born in Seoul, Korea. And in the year 2000, I became a citizen, and a few months later, I ran for office. And luckily enough, in a 4-way race, I won about 56%, and ever since then, I've been serving as a Santa Clara County Board of Education member for 20 years. My experience of housing, I can tell you my experience of now. I was separated and divorced in year 2014, and I'm one of those women who stayed in a bad marriage thinking that I couldn't afford to pay for housing on my own. So when we were separated in 2014, I rented a room from a family paying $1,000 in Santa Clara. Stayed there for 2 years, and I was barely able to afford a 1-bedroom apartment with 2 boys with 50% joint custody. So I'm still there with 3 of us sharing custody with pull-out couches and futons, and we're making ends meet. So whichever issues that Silicon Valley at Home is advocating for, more housing, affordable homes, and rent control, that's my story as well.
My name is Natasha Gupta. I'm a technology worker. I'm a resident in the San Jose community, and running a 100% grassroots campaign that, among other things, we're not taking funding from corporate PACs or private investors and developers. And my first experience with housing began about 6 years ago when I was a young grad and I got my first job. And you take what you can get, so I got a job that paid $15 an hour. I was a temp, I had no benefits, and among other things, I certainly couldn't afford to live off of North 1st Street and rent any apartment there off of that kind of salary. And like many millennials my age, I made the decision to live at home with my parents. They lived all the way in Danville, and for the first 2.5 years of my career, I was living my life on the 680 freeway for 3 hours of my day, going to night school at night for computer science skills so that I could get that better job, so that perhaps I could have a shot at owning a home. Well, 3 years later, I was in the rush to go and try to buy my first house. I'd saved up, and I was confronted with another reality, that as a single unmarried woman, as someone first time going to the market, how difficult it was to get a bank to loan to me. And then when I was able to secure that, how difficult it was when I saw condo after condo was being sold for $200,000, $300,000 over asking price. Foreign speculators and property investors were all getting in the way of me possibly getting in that offer for a home. And it was just by sheer luck that I was able to find a place to stay. And that is how I realized so personally that the dream of home ownership for so much of our generation often feels like a distant one. And I've heard all across this community, all across our door knocking, that so many of us are just one paycheck away from possibly losing our right to a home. And that is why I am running.
My name is Jim Canova. I served on the Santa Clara Unified School District Governing Board for 27 years. I've served in a role as a member and board president on 2 occasions. I also have served as president and am currently a board member For the Metro Ed Governing Board, that's a Silicon Valley Career Tech Education Center, something I'm very passionate about and it relates to this affordability issue. And this is a very high priority for me in Sacramento, is we need to restore direct funding to career tech education centers in our state. When we talk about affordability, all the things that we're going to discuss tonight, one aspect that needs to be discussed is we need to empower not just our young people, but really all of our citizens with the ability to afford more. And that's what career tech education does. And it's been living on the fumes of grant dollars for years. I've gone to Sacramento repeatedly to lobby for more money. We've expanded it by hundreds of millions of dollars, but it's still grant money. It used to be something that Sacramento directly funded. Career tech is something that both parties can wrap their arms around because it's about giving skill sets to our young people and adults so they can have successful careers. And with 1 minute left, I want to talk about my first housing experience. It was in the city of Milpitas, and my wife and I were expecting our first child, our daughter, who now lives in Sacramento and is a teacher's aide. And we decided, well, my wife decided, that we were going to get a house with her mom. So I lived with my mother-in-law for a while, and it was okay for me because I was working so much, but my wife and my mother-in-law didn't get along very well. So that was short-lived. I have 30 seconds left. But that was my first housing experience, sharing a mortgage with my mother-in-law.
Thank you so much, everyone. Before we go on, I just wanted to take a moment to read a candidate forum statement from Ann Kepner, who is also running for AD 25. She couldn't be here today, and she wanted us to make sure we read this. Hello, everyone. Sorry I wasn't able to be with you tonight. The West Valley Mission Community College District Board is meeting now, so as board president, I needed to be there. California is on the cusp of major progress in addressing the housing crisis. Consciousness has been raised among citizens, legislators, and the business community. It's a crisis that we created and that we can and must solve. The challenge is complex, balancing demand for housing and effective public transportation while protecting the environment. In the Bay Area, we see many stakeholders coming together to address this challenge. California needs 3.5 million more homes. Zoning restrictions that prohibit anything but single-family homes on 75% of our land must be changed. SB 50 provides a solution. It would be a mistake to not make regulatory changes to allow for housing investment already approved by voters and that tech giants have offered to help fund. As we add jobs, we must insist on housing for workers at all income levels, all of whom contribute to thriving businesses and neighborhoods. As we protect precious open space such as Coyote Valley and commit to mitigating climate change, we must allow for dense building along transit lines, seriously invest in public transit to address traffic congestion that will accompany greater density, correct the jobs to housing imbalance, and curb displacement. Recently passed AB 1482 makes progress towards stabilizing the rental market. Government can help by making publicly owned parcels available for affordable housing and intervening to prevent displacement when existing affordable housing is under threat. Bold action by the County of Santa Clara to save the Buena Vista Mobile Home Park in Palo Alto kept 400 residents in their homes. Local decision-making is a critical component of the process, but cannot address the problem alone. I recognize that not all people agree on how to solve our housing crisis. Still, we must continue to work towards a solution. I am a leader who will convene and participate in difficult conversations and persist until residents of Assembly District 25 and beyond have access to affordable housing. So that was Ann Kepner's statements. And now we're going to move into talking about housing leadership. And you are all going to have 2 minutes to respond to this question. The question is, what do you see as the role of the state in addressing the housing crisis, and what would be your priorities? And we're going to start with Mr. Brunton.
Well, thank you for such a light question. Land use is certainly the purview usually of the local county, a local government. But clearly what they're doing is not working well. And the state's going to have to take a larger role in working with this issue. Now, when I go to Sacramento, my top priority in this area is to make sure that we actually create an area where we can have a robust and healthy home market and living market. And some of my ideas are a little out of the box, so let me share some of these with you. One, we need to change the calculus of how housing is done. There's such a pushback on the NIMBY side. We know we need housing, but there's always this huge pushback from other groups who do not want new housing. I'm recommending that we do some sales tax reform. That we take, not add sales tax, but we take 2 cents of our current sales tax and give it to the zip code of where you live. This is a gentle way of pushing, like a city like Palo Alto, which has 3.4 jobs for every house, and San Jose, which has 0.7 jobs for every house. That's why you have all that huge traffic problem. But it would reward the cities who are doing some housing issues. So this would provide a pushback against the NIMBYism. And you could use this money as a starting of the redevelopment agencies. They're so needed by the cities. 2, with seniors, where they're going to go. There's 2 major issues for seniors. They all know that all this talk on Prop 13, and it gets them a little nervous. We should be expanding the opportunities for them to move. It's wrong that some counties won't accept, like Monterey County and Santa Cruz County, won't accept them to move from their low property tax levels to their districts, we could free up some of the housing they're just sitting in. Also, they have to spend down so much money. If they could keep more money to qualify for social programs, they shouldn't have to become working poor people just to get programs for the seniors. And lastly, we'll talk about mass transit reforms. So I guess I ran out of time. We'll cover that next question.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Anna Song again. I do believe there's a leadership and role for the state legislature to play in encouraging more housing. Even though local control and local ordinances is in place for the cities and counties to have their own ordinances. SB 50 was mentioned, and though I support SB 50 in concept, and we'll talk about it furthermore, general guidelines and streamlining of current existing ordinances might be something that state could play a role. Each cities and each counties have different code and ordinances, and sometimes that can get in the way of things like building ADUs, tiny homes in the backyard. And what state can do is make sure that the guidelines are provided in general for the benefit of all Californians. And I support such bills that could look into practical ways of applying, bringing more housing in the state.
So when we talk about the state's role in resolving the housing crisis, we have to think of 2 prongs of the problem. We have to think about the supply issue, and we have to think about the pathway to thriving and having that sense of home ownership or a place to stay. So let's tackle the first one. It was mentioned a lot, the issue of zoning and bureaucratic reform of some of these zoning laws. In addition to that, we also have to look at incentivizing developers to build affordable housing with the expansion of density bonus laws. Some legislation has already been proposed here by Assemblyman Chu in Bill 1763. Additionally, we have to look at the pathway to having a shelter and a place to live. Incentivizing home ownership through programs such as giving some kind of a tax benefit to your corporation or to your place of work, giving you some contribution to your down payment for a home, and championing a private-public sector partnership in metropolitan areas where gentrification has been a huge part of these companies moving in and making them part and parcel of the solution of funding and development, such as what we're seeing with Google downtown, where they're funding the Kelsey development of housing disabled and homeless populations and contributing millions of dollars in funding to working with our local government and our state government to be able to be part of the solution and not the problem. That is going to be a major part in how the state will effectively solve this problem of not just affordability, not just supply, but also giving people a permanent common sense solution.
I know that we'll get into SB 50 later, and SB 50 is really, it's a very target-rich topic. But what I would like to say prior to getting into that is that Sacramento can facilitate successful regional planning that would really incorporate considerations for infrastructure. What SB 50 lacked and what a lot of the solutions that are being proposed lacks is they're not considering all of the things that lead to our quality of life. When you build anything, you need schools, open space, water, utilities, police, fire, and transportation. SB 50 completely set that aside. You can't build communities like that. The quality of life will be very, very much impacted by not taking into consideration the infrastructure component to anything that you build. I do think Sacramento has a role to play. I don't see it as a top-down role. I see it as a bottom-up role. I see that Sacramento can hopefully bring together the local governance of local cities together to achieve regional outcomes. And I really think Sacramento can set that template. But if it's going to be something where Sacramento is dictating what's done at the local level, there's a lot of issues with that. You're obviously taking away the autonomy of local city government. That's a problem. SB 50 had pushback from cities across the state, including LA. And, but we'll get into SB 50 more later, but that gives you a little bit of a thumbnail of where I'm going.
So when it comes to the state role in addressing the housing crisis, I think the 3 Ps comes to mind, right? So protection of renters from displacement and preservation of affordable housing units must come first before production. And what I see a lot of times, especially in my home city of San Jose right now, is production sometimes seems to take a priority before the other 2 Ps. And I think profoundly that is a mistake. What we need to do is actually constantly push for more affordable housing to be created, because we will not solve our production issue just by producing market rate housing. Now I'll show us a couple stats to highlight this. In my current city of San Jose, there are we've met 14% of our RENA goals for low income housing. And we've met 87% when it comes to above market rate housing. And in the biggest city in Alameda County, which is the other county in our district, Fremont has created 18% of their low-income housing, but get this, 227% of their above-market rate housing. So when it comes to production, we have to look at it from 2 angles, right? There's the private approach, and then there will be the public approach. The private approach, I'll be happy to co-author and help support those bills, but they will not be my priority. It will not be my priority to make it easier for developers to make luxury apartments and make profit off of our housing crisis. For me, it will be making sure that they're meeting their obligation of delivering affordable units by law. And at the same time, we need to repeal Article 34 of the Constitution to reinstitute social public housing in this country so that we, as a public, can create housing at much better income integration levels. So instead of 15% affordable targets, we should have 80% affordable targets, obviously mixed in income, right? And you're seeing this already with our school districts, right? If school districts are now becoming, housing constructors and landlords, what does that say about our current housing crisis? And that's why we need a strong public approach, because it should be for the public good. And that, when I talk to so many people at the doors, is they are just upset that there are luxury skyscrapers and condos going on because that doesn't benefit the communities. It often just displaces people, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that later. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We're going to be going into our next question now, which some of you have already went into, Senate Bill 50. One of this year's most discussed housing bills was SB 50, which would rewrite zoning codes to allow mid-rise apartments in transit-rich areas and multifamily housing in jobs-rich areas. And the question is, do you support SB 50, and why or why not? You have 90 seconds to answer, and we're going to start with Ms. Song.
So as I mentioned previously, I support the idea and concept, but I think it can be improved as it's written now. I grew up in Seoul, Korea, so high-density housing I'm very comfortable with. That's not what I'm struggling with, but we do need multi-use homes. We do need multiplex homes, but if it attracts expensive homes, and as a result of it, as unintended consequences, and therefore it causes gentrification or displacement of the current residents, it would be extremely problematic. But the idea of creating more homes where the public transportation is available is direly needed. I worked in Berkeley, living in Santa Clara, drove an hour at best, an hour and a half, and I desperately wanted to take Caltrain and BART home and to work. It cost $30 a day and 5 hours in total in round trip, and it just was not attainable. We need to do better.
So I support the crux of what SB 50 is trying to do, which is attacking the first problem we talked about of increasing housing supply, and then also promoting a notion of smart growth. Now, one provision of the bill which is a little bit problematic is that the developers under this measure can opt for in lieu of fees, even where on-site affordable units are feasible financially. Where this could get very problematic is that the bill's intention of creating inclusionary communities and having inclusionary units get built, we have to ensure that those inclusionary units get built nearby if they can't be built in that exact site, to ensure that our communities are kept diverse and inclusive as well. So otherwise, the premise of SB 50 is a valuable one in the housing conversation and does a lot to move forward the conversation on zoning and land use law.
I agree that SB 50 contributes to the conversation, but we have to remember that SB 50 is a modified version of SB 827, which also failed, and also SB 50 failed. They both failed. And I think that it's interesting we're having such a conversation about failed legislation. It did not get through, and I don't see it going through in its current construct. What I already discussed earlier, and something to be pointed out with SB 827, which really triggered the need for SB 50, which was massaged, is the concerns regarding SB 827 was gentrification and also having existing affordable communities devastated, removed, eliminated in the process of pursuing the outlines of SB 827. So the language was modified to SB 50, but the problem still remains. It overrides local government. The only way we're going to get there, the only way we're going to have truly smart growth is with real regional planning. This is harder work than just simply signing a piece of legislation. It's really easy to put our faces with some piece of legislation, get it to the governor, and get it signed and said, problem solved. This is an ongoing effort that's going to take years and decades of work. We need to work with local government. Sacramento needs to lead the way. But we can't be a top-down dictatorial process. We have to engage local government. They need to be part of the solution. That's how you get truly smart growth that's truly regional and truly meets the needs of our district and certainly Silicon Valley.
Yeah, so as for SB 50, if I were an assembly member and say we're in today, I would definitely be proud to co-author the bill and support it. My top concern is obviously with the concerns of the previous generation of the bill was displacement, right? So I want to make sure there are strong protections for renters, especially those that could be displaced or could be gentrified out of their homes. But with that being said, as a legislative staffer, the bill isn't dead yet. As we all know, bills are constantly just conversations that we have as a state, right? We keep massaging it, we keep making it more and more perfect. It's not going to be perfect the first time through. And that's why I would want to be a co-author, to make sure by the time it gets to the assembly that has very robust, strong tenant protections in it. Because the core of the crux of the issue is that local governments are failing to deliver the affordable housing that needs to be done, and in a smart growth, dense manner that has to be done, right? SB 50 and its previous bill that Senator Wiener did, SB 35, are brilliant ways to actually make and spur local governments to actually do their responsible affordable housing construction, right? So that's why I think SB 50 is so necessary, and even though I obviously have a stronger heart when it comes to public options, this is obviously a market-driven approach, right? SB 50, we all know, is obviously a market-driven approach. And I will still be supporting this to make sure we can get there on every level, right? Because this housing crisis is 40+ years in the making, and we have to tackle it from every end, and we cannot rely on the status quo or just one or two solutions, like it's magic, to do it. And it's going to be a long, protracted conversation, and yes, we will need more regional planning, but I think SB 50 has brought such a great conversation about our zoning laws, about housing crisis, and that is where we're going to keep going.
I would not have supported SB 50. It was both an overreach and also it didn't really look at the real issues in the total sense. We talked, for instance, with high-density housing, the need for mass transit. And a core element of my portfolio is to talk about mass transit reforms. I'm the only candidate here who actually lives in Alameda County. In Alameda County, we get to vote for the AC Transit Board, and we get to vote for the BART Board. There are 24 mass transit agencies in the Bay Area, and they don't work well together. And only 2 have elected boards. My proposal is that we need to get our mass transit agencies, we need to both consolidate and make them more accountable. We need elected board members, because when we talk about all the dispersion of housing and how long it takes, You know, Anna talked about the 4 hours. I live 8 miles from the San Jose airport. I decided to take mass transit. It took me an hour and a half to get the 8 miles. This is crazy. We have all this traffic, and we have these 24 agencies. They don't work well together. And if we're going to do housing in high-density ways, we're going to have mass transit work together. And that's one thing Sacramento can do. SB 50 didn't deal with that. Bob Brunton and some of the legislation I'm going to be talking about is bringing our mass transit agencies, incentivizing them to consolidate and improve their service to our citizens.
Thank you, everyone. So this year, the legislature passed a number of landmark housing bills. And the next question is, which one was the most compelling to you and why? And you have 1 minute to respond to this question, and we'll start with Ms. Gupta.
So I have to give a couple of bills for this particular one. Particularly compelling was the number of accessory dwelling unit bills that was passed, in particular Senator Wachowski's bill, Senate Bill 13. One of the real advantages of ADU solutions is that it's a very bipartisan approach when we talk about home ownership. It provides relief to a lot of our senior population in terms of giving them basically a safe pathway to be able to build affordable housing that will lift some of that tax burden with inviting more residents to be able to live in that housing. It is a very common sense way to increase residential density as well. A second bill that I thought was a really landmark decision was Nancy Skinner's bill, Senate Bill 330, the Housing Crisis Act of 2019. It was a pivotal measure in ensuring we cut the time to building more housing and having a statewide mandate to work directly with the local governments in ensuring that more housing gets built. We cut through that red tape, and we ensure that we can tackle the supply problem of our housing crisis.
I didn't know we were allowed to choose two. Who changed the rule? I'm just kidding. Actually, I would be in agreement with Natasha. I like SB 13 from Bob Wachowski. I had the honor of serving as his delegate for a couple of years, so I was actually close to his team when they were developing that. And it's just really, it's innovative, and it's something that's so easy to implement. And it's not just for, typically when people think of SB 13, the accessory dwelling units that you build in your backyard, you know, we typically think of perhaps our grandparents or seniors that might take advantage of that, but quite honestly, a lot of our young generation could take advantage of that as well. And I spoke to the first housing experience I had where we were sharing a house with my mother-in-law. I think America, in terms of its history, in terms of housing, there was a time that if you go before the 50s, you have to go back some distance in time, before World War II in all likelihood, where it was very common to have multi-generations live in a house. It was very common. And it was really not until the 50s and 60s that this notion came along that we all have to go out and buy our own individual house. And that's kind of been something that's been dominating our society for a while. And so today, oh, I have to stop, I'm done. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Lee.
So I definitely think the most pivotal housing bill of this year would be definitely Assemblymember Bonta and Chu's bill, AB 1482, which finally gave us statewide rent control and just cause eviction. You know, when it came out of the Assembly, we thought that wasn't going to happen because it got watered down, but they finally pulled off what we thought was almost the unthinkable and got rent control through, which is an enormous win for renters and working class families in the state, enormous win. But we can do, but it highlights what we can keep doing too, because obviously SB 1482, as great as it was, has some compromises, right? It's got some sunsets in there, the enactment date and everything, but we can still do a lot more. And that's why I want to build upon those successes, join Assemblymember Chu and Bonta, and finally repeal Costa-Hawkins, finally repealing Costa-Hawkins so that people can finally actually afford to live here in the Bay Area and in this state, right? So finally, we're leveraging some great wins from tenants and tenant organizing, and instead of, you know, always relying on the landed gentry class. So as someone who's from the landless proletariat, I'm always going to be supporting tenant protections. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad to see a lot of people talking about Bob Wachowski's accelerated dwelling unit. You know, we ran together in Fremont the Vote for Bob when he was running for city council and I was running for school board. We're hoping to be running again for Vote for Bob as he's running for county supervisor in Alameda, and I'll be, of course, running for state assembly there. What struck me is not that I couldn't figure out one, that there was the sheer amount of bills that came out for housing was overwhelming. What strikes me is how knee-jerk the reactions were. Instead of really focusing in on the large pictures, it seems to me that the politicians in Sacramento said, oh my God, we better do something, otherwise, do something. But, so this is craziness. We need to do fewer things better instead of more things worse. And that's the problem we're having in California. We do so many things poorly. And this housing issue has become so political. You know, one thing that could make this better is also go to public financing of campaigns. Because the reality is that what happens is the politicians in the small races, often the largest donors to their campaigns are either developers or people who are anti-development.
Hi, Anna Song again. My favorite bill that has passed this year is AB 68 by Assemblymember Phil Ting. And it also addresses the issues with ADU, the accessory dwelling unit. We're very familiar with in-law unit, granny units, and I got very interested in it when tiny home movement started to become popular. And at that time, I learned that our cities, our neighboring cities, are not necessarily allowing tiny homes to be built here in the Bay Area because of a lot of codes and building restrictions. And Assemblymember Phil's bill removes a lot of those red tapes. And it's exciting for me because I thought living in the Bay Area, attaining home was out of my reach. And having more ADUs, and I believe if all the homes with huge backyards were to be open to building ADUs, I think finding a home for me all of a sudden becomes attainable. So this is my favorite.
Thank you, everyone. Next, we'll be talking about tenant protections. Research shows that many households are being forced to move as housing costs rise. This is changing the nature of our neighborhoods and the community's character as longtime productive residents pack up and leave. This year, the legislature passed AB 1482 to stabilize rents and protect renters from eviction statewide. What more can the state do to stem displacement? For this one, the candidates will have 2 minutes to respond, and we are going to start with Mr. Canova.
So I'll be very quickly. So of course, AB 1482 has already been signed by the governor and passed. And I think initially we do need to let that unwind a little bit and to see the effectiveness of it. My concern with rent control, generally speaking, is it's a two-edged sword. It provides a short-term solution, but it's not a long-term solution. And I think the long-term solution is obviously our housing stock. We do have to increase production. That's bottom line. That's ultimately the only way you bring costs down is to increase production. You have to. You must. It's supply and demand. This is not something that I just created. And so the rent control piece is a Band-Aid, but it doesn't resolve the issue. And so we need to find ways to increase that housing supply, and we need to find ways that do all the things that we've discussed here, respecting the environment, open space, infrastructure needs. That's so incredibly important. We can't be building without infrastructure. I can't emphasize that enough. I've served on the school district for years. You have developers coming in trying to put in high-density units, and they're not providing the resources for the schools. And if the schools are being left wanting, what about all those other infrastructure issues, the police, the fire, the water, the utilities, the open space, and the transportation piece too? All of that is part of our quality of life. So we can't build anything without considering the infrastructure component. And that just doesn't come up in these conversations. It never comes up in these conversations. So I try to always inject it. And I only have a few seconds left. In terms of protecting renters, there are a lot of things that already exist. Project Sentinel has a fantastic record in terms of protecting renters. That's already there. It's already in place. Also, the governor just signed SB 113, which provides some protections as well. It's targeting $331 million to address those issues. So there's a lot going on to protect renters already. But I do think we need to let 1482 unwind a little bit because the legislature might have to come back and modify it.
Thank you.
So certainly the legislature can do more to protect tenants, and when it comes to modifying AB 1482, we should do our best to delete the sunset provisions, so just cause and rent control are in perpetuity in California, In addition to that, when we, hopefully one day when we achieve repealing Costa-Hawkins, we can also achieve putting rent control on buildings that are more modern and more recent as well, and also let local jurisdictions, if we believe in local control, right, local jurisdictions decide for themselves if they want to lower their rent control percentage even lower, so that rent can stay as stable as possible and families can stay housed. And if a project is, for instance, or not project, I should say, if a property is sold, renters, I believe, should have the first right of refusal to cooperatively own that property if possible. And if not, then we should also make sure that displacement protections are very strong so they have a right to be rehoused and rehomed. And at the same time, when we talk about the supply issue, we constantly obviously need to be pushing for the public housing approach so that they are guaranteed protected by income level. And how we can achieve that is leveraging our success with another Assemblymember David Chu bill was the public banking. So maybe we can use that to leverage to finally get infrastructure like roads, transit, and public housing finally constructed. So I will agree, just cause and rent control are temporary measures, but that is the same thing as if the housing crisis is the biggest wildfire we've ever seen. They are the rent control and just cause are the firefighters on the front line. We need them there to stop the crisis from getting worse and devastating more families, and that is why rent control and just cause are so necessary, and we need to make it in perpetuity and extend to more properties across the state and benefit more families.
Now, for all the hoopla of the 1482 that passed, according to Zillow, it will affect 7% of the renters in the state of California, but it'll cause confusion for the other 93%. I agree this thing has to be unwound. I think the biggest winner of AB 1482 is going to be the lawyers. I can already see all with the just cause evictions and all other people, all these different, why isn't mine covered, what's going to be going on. It's sad that how much money we waste on legal bills where we could be doing things for our citizens. And AB 1482 did not add any more housing. Matter of fact, it could even decrease housing because some investors may not want to build more. In addition, it's just raising costs on that legal side. Now, again, some of the message I would do for increasing supply, my sales tax reform idea would in fact provide both incentives and cash flow for the cities to do the infrastructure they need. It has worked in other parts of the country. Also, the issuance of non-recourse loans, which they do in Texas, could allow for people to buy portions of a house, to be a somewhat investor with you to help get some shared equity. Because we want to encourage home ownership. People will drive 3 hours for a homeowner. And so it's obvious the need is there. We need to find ways to have some of our seniors be willing to leave their homes. Some of these wonderful homes that I live in, a wonderful home as an example, it should be for a young family to move into. Ways in which to take our sales tax, our lower property tax, and move it to another property. So there are things we can do. The AP 1482 passed. We'll see how it unwinds, but I believe the biggest winners are going to be the lawyers on this one.
Well, I'm going to have to disagree with my previous candidate's answer. I think 1482 is a good start, as it's been mentioned by other candidates. It's a good defender to start. It's not perfect, but it's something we needed. And if it only affects 7%, I can't imagine the fight that it took to have it passed. There must be something else going on. As a renter, as I mentioned earlier, as I was getting divorced, started with $1,000 a room rent, and now one bedroom is $2,000. It's ridiculous. It's out of control. And every day when I mention this, people come up to me and say, where do you find $2,000 one-bedroom apartment in Santa Clara? That question itself is ridiculous, but that's our reality. All the more reasons we need to create more affordable housing, but it's also interesting that Jim Canova mentioned Project Sentinel. I worked there many years ago as a mediator and fair housing investigator. Number one discrimination is not based on race. Number one discrimination in the Bay Area is for families with children. And we need to educate landlords. We need to continue to fight and continue to subsidize organizations like Project Sentinel and other organizations that provide landlord-tenant mediation as well. It's not perfect, but it's a good start.
So as a homeowner myself, as much as I am aware that there are so many benefits to that discussion and promoting that among our generation, let me also say that homeownership and promoting that doesn't have to be separate from the very important landmark that we achieve with Bill 1482. Now, one of the gaps that currently exists in the bill, as much as it is protecting existing tenants, there isn't too much for new tenants, as stated in the current bill. Now, one of the problems that we're going to have to tackle as an addition to this bill is extending housing and rental assistance through perhaps housing vouchers or housing subsidies to those who will need it. Teacher Housing has proposed this as one part of some of these initiatives locally. Another part is that we have to establish a fund to legally fight landlords who abuse this law, because often what happens to a lot of tenants is that they have no legal recourse if they need to bring up a complaint. And so that is an important part of the enforcement of 1482 as well, and ensuring that it lives up to its promise.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to be moving on to the fun section of our evening, rapid fire. So we're going to be doing some questions. So there are a lot of issues that did not pass the legislature this year. So we're going to be going into those via questions to which candidates can only respond with one sentence, okay? One sentence. And we're going to start, so I'll basically ask a question. We're going to start with Mr. Lee here for the first one. And then he's just going to respond, and we're going to go right down the line. And then I'll do the next question. We'll start with you, Mr. Brunton, and then the same thing. We'll go right down the line, okay? So one sentence. I know it might be hard, but you can do it. Okay, so first question, starting here with Mr. Lee. What's your favorite ice cream flavor?
It is definitely matcha ice cream.
Oh, good one.
Pistachio.
I would have said matcha, but black sesame is also good too.
Mint chip.
Chocolate.
Perfect. And now starting with Mr. Brunton. So yes or no, amending the state's constitution to lower the 2/3 voter threshold required to approve revenue measures for affordable housing to a 55% supermajority. One sentence.
No.
Yes.
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 Yes, I support ACA 1 by Agua Curry.
And now, starting with Ms. Song, yes or no, efforts to reform Proposition 13 to have a split roll tax, which would generate billions through increased commercial property taxes.
Yes.
With provisions for small business owners to not suffer from rental hikes.
It's a yes or no option here, so.
But you can do one sentence if you'd like. You can do.
I will say no, based on the fact that my concern is for those small and medium-sized businesses. We've discussed how difficult it is for families to live here. It's also difficult for businesses, small and medium, to be here.
Okay.
Yes, I believe small business is already included in the Schools and Community First, which I am proud to have signed and still support to this day.
No.
Okay. And the next question is, what was the last transit trip you took? Starting with Ms. Gupta.
Caltrain and BART to San Francisco, 3-hour trip.
I'm light rail downtown San Jose, but I'm a cyclist and I prefer to ride my bike whenever I get the chance.
It was BART to Oakland, but very quickly, as this is one sentence, I'm using parentheses in it, I live 1 or 2 miles away from the new Berryessa BART station, but it is harder to get to it than the Great Mall one in Milpitas, funny enough.
I live in Fremont. I took Fremont BART to San Francisco and also took the Capital Corridor to Sacramento. And that's how I plan to get to work when I go to Sacramento, is make it a working train. Come and join me on the Capital Corridor if it goes from Fremont to Sacramento.
It was Amtrak from San Jose Dirdon Station to Anaheim, where my mother lives, and it took all day.
Thank you. Starting with Mr. Canova, yes or no? Efforts to bring back redevelopment?
No, redevelopment is devastating to school districts. It's devastating to all. If you are in an area that has been targeted by redevelopment, all of your basic services suffer because money is diverted away from your area. And so, no.
Yes, it delivers public social housing without trying to adversely affect our school districts too, which the Schools and Community First ballot initiative will help.
Yes, we learned from the past, we can improve it, but that is a very definite part of my proposal to bring back redevelopment agencies.
As a longtime school board member, I would have to say no and agree with Jim Canova here.
Yes, I support it.
Okay. And now, starting with Mr. Lee, where's the best place to get coffee in the Assembly District?
He gets all the easy questions.
So I don't drink coffee actually, but I drink tea. But I do really like Community Coffee in Milpitas. It's a really nice spot. It's actually inside a church. Did I steal your spot? I'm sorry.
Good.
It's a really nice spot. It's very close to where I went to elementary school, so it's really nice.
Community coffee in Milpitas, and to add to it, a portion of every sale goes to charity. How can it be any better than that?
There's a place called Voyager Craft Coffee on Stevens Creek in Santa Clara. It's a must-try.
Cafe Bene off of Tasman. It's got great herbal tea and cakes.
The best cup of coffee I've ever had in 8025 was made by Teresa O'Neill, city council member in Santa Clara. I was awake for 18 hours.
Whoa.
Is it like a triple espresso?
It must have been good. Okay, starting with Mr. Brunton. Again, yes or no? Streamlining CEQA requirements to remove barriers to housing production.
No.
Yes.
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 Depends. It must be to actually protect the environment, especially if it's a high affordability project and if it's mass transit. I have a very strict requirement when it comes to forming CEQA.
Okay, and here's the last rapid fire question from Ms. Song. Again, yes or no? Increased funding for tenants' legal counsel.
Yes, emphasizing the need for more mediation services.
Yes.
Yes, but this is already being addressed. I mentioned the governor just signed SB 113, so it's already being dealt with, but yes.
Yes, we always need more tenant protection and tenant power.
Yes, and I forgot from my answer, I wanted to bring it back as Santa Clara was the first county to have a public defender's office for criminal lawsuits. I wanted to have a public defender for civil lawsuits, and that was an area where would be for justice for the renters' protection. So your graduates at Santa Clara University could get a nice job working for public defenders on the civil side.
Thank you. Okay, now we will move on to receive questions from members in our audience. I already have a few cards here, but if anybody would still like to ask a question, or you have an index card with a question on it, just raise it and someone will come around to get it. I'm going to go ahead and, as they're collecting any extra cards, start with our questions here. So this first one, okay, there's 3 pieces to this, and you will only have 30 seconds to respond.
What now? 3 pieces?
Okay? It's just, yeah, you can do it. Okay. What about tiny houses? Where is it okay to put them, and what limits? We'll start with Ms. Gupta.
So I think it's an interesting solution, and as far as where to put them, the emphasis again has to be on targeting the most vulnerable communities for which this is a growing problem in our cities. In San Jose, for example, this was a major initiative that was touted by the mayor, and certainly it's an innovative solution for us to deal with displacement.
Thank you.
And absolutely, this is all in the spirit of modular construction, quite honestly. So when you think of a modern manufactured home community, and I live in one, I own a manufactured home, and I've owned it for many years. You have a mortgage on the house, and it goes up with the market rate, but you're paying a lease payment on the lot that the home sits on. It's an innovative way to allow people to live in Silicon Valley. That kind of housing is still affordable and needs to be protected and preserved. I think the smaller house is a spin-off of the same concept, but really bottom line is it's manufactured modular housing. It's a solution. It makes homes more affordable for people.
Thank you.
So definitely tiny homes are an interesting solution. They are being used to house the unhoused near my house where I live in the Berryessa BART station right now in San Jose, if you're familiar with the project that was just built. So they're actually over there and you can see them. Although I will say that it definitely is not the silver bullet we're looking for the housing crisis. It's not a very efficient use of land. In fact, I mean, they're the same use of land, you could build a lot more units on them, but I think it's a good stopgap measure if we need housing quickly and affordably for people very quickly. And owing to the nature of tiny homes, often they can be moved, so that's also nice.
Thank you.
I think we should really try to fix the problems instead of putting Band-Aids. We know the problem exists. And I don't think that tiny homes is the answer to the question, the answer to the problem. There are ways to temporarily house people, but let's really work on how to incentivize the cities like Palo Alto to want to build houses and put where they're close to work, because our traffic problems are being caused tremendously by some cities just refusing to put up housing and leaving other cities, mostly cities in our district, to house these people.
As I mentioned in my previous answer, I really would like to see tiny homes in backyards of our homes. There are many, many homes, older homes, that have huge backyards that looks like somebody's park. And there's room to bring those tiny homes as a separate dwelling unit.
Thank you. Okay, the next question. How will you stand up to NIMBYism when neighbors don't want housing alternatives in their neighborhoods? And we'll start with Mr. Canova.
Gosh, that's so difficult. Even in the context of my experience on a school board, when you have new schools construction go forward, you get NIMBY responses many times to the development. The best thing that I have found over the years is you need to be as transparent as possible. You need to listen. You know, these communities, I think a huge piece of the currency is to listen to them and to their concerns. But in governance, nuance is everything. You know, a lot of our questions here tonight were yes, no. That's not governance. Governance is nuance.
So when it comes to NIMBYism, I tend not to like to use that term to characterize people. I think a lot of people in our communities, rightfully so, feel resentment when it comes to projects that are very much steamrolled through the development process because they don't actually benefit the communities. If they see them as luxury apartments and new apartment complexes that contribute to a lot of traffic, as ERRs will show, people will rightfully feel pissed off because they feel like it doesn't actually help the community. So how we can address NIMBYism, or the root causes of it, is to actually expand our mass transit infrastructure, and our affordable housing stock. Because I think when people see that there's real community benefits to these things being built and not just developer profits, then people actually will be okay with it. But when they see these projects doing these things and it affects their quality of life without a real benefit to the larger community, then obviously they are rightfully feel pissed, and I understand that. So we're going to do it that way.
You know, one thing we didn't talk much about today, which is also part of this equation, is education improvements. Because part of this NIMBYism built into it is that where quality schools are located. Because a lot of parents want to have their, you know, for instance, if you live in Antioch but you work at Cupertino, you might want to put your child in the Cupertino Unified School District for a variety of reasons. We need to improve our schools throughout the entire Bay Area. Oakland's horrible as an example, needs some great improvements, so that we can actually build some housing there where people would want to be there. Because a lot of times people also want to be, you know, close to where they work, close to where they have good quality of schools. And so if we improve all of these things, and along with mass transit, maybe we can make our backyard larger, because we can actually make the whole Bay Area our backyard. Thank you.
Thank you. I think definitely community conversation and dialogue is important. As you may know already, in education, many of our districts in our current assembly district see that young families are moving out. And so there's a decline in population of kindergarten, first grade student numbers. And that's just to name one problem related to housing. So in terms of the term NIMBYism, you know, community advisory board is needed, town hall is needed, and definitely the ongoing education of the effect that has on the community, not just in housing, transportation level, but all prongs of systems that's creating the problem in our community.
So proactive efforts by the community to bring the various stakeholders together are very effective. In fact, in UCLA, the Westwood Council was very good at doing this. They brought the landlords, they brought the tenants, they brought the student populations together to make very critical conversations happen about how housing was going to be resolved as an issue for their community. I also think earlier we brought up the issue of CEQA being used for frivolous lawsuits. Certainly any CEQA reform has to take that into consideration because it's certainly not relevant if, for example, you have blocking of a Planned Parenthood being built on account of noise issues being incurred by anti-abortion activists. Such frivolous lawsuits that are made in the name of environmental protection are definitely not applicable here, and that is a big step in tackling some of the safeguards that have protected NIMBY.
Thank you. Next audience question. What do you support in dealing with houseless people while permanent supportive housing is being built? And we'll start with Mr. Lee.
Yeah, so I am definitely a big supporter of the housing first approach. We need to make sure our unhoused population gets housed first before any of the services we give them, whether it be mental health, physical health, or economic help, right? We need to view that first. So yes, as we have seen in San Jose, tiny homes can be one solution, but permanent supportive housing is, I think, the most important thing to do. But in the meantime, we also have great projects coming out. So in the city of Fremont, they just approved the Navigation Center, which I was a big supporter of, even though it had a lot of controversy, and I actually had some voters yell at my face because I supported it. But the Navigation Center is very important because it's essentially, just like on this campus, a resource center for people who are struggling economically, right? So they can figure out where to go, what help to seek, and we need to spur a lot more of those kind of conversations, a lot more of those resources out for people so they don't fall all the way down through the cracks of our society.
In Milpitas, they have the Santa Clara house sharing program, also put together by the Catholic Charities. These are ways in which you can try to help find homes, bring some people in for a short period of time. Some of these big houses, and they do some of the making sure the process that you cannot sort of live together and work together, provide some of the safety, because these houses, sometimes a senior might be willing to bring a person in as long as it's for safe reasons. So I support these ideas of the churches and the other charities trying to do some house sharing programs as a way to alleviate some of the housing homelessness problems.
So we need to continue to fund the many services that are out there to provide mental health and job retain programs for homeless population as well. And to note that there are homeless population that are just out of their homes, just temporary time being, and then there are repeated permanent homeless population as well. And obviously we need to approach them with different services, but first, finding a home, whether that's shared housing or affordable housing or tiny homes, and all the good ideas that we're talking about, but also providing services to make sure that they're off the street is very important as well.
So it costs $85,000 to leave someone on the street, but it costs $25,000 to put them in supportive housing. And often when we talk about the notion of right to shelter laws, what we really have to be talking about is a right to rehabilitation, a right to retraining, a right to thrive. And so any housing policy that we evaluate in really resolving the problem and the cycle of homelessness has to absolutely be attached to rehabilitation services and to job retraining for our homeless, because it's not just our responsibility to shelter our homeless, but to give them a pathway towards restoring their sense of self-identity and dignity and allowing them to re-enter our society.
I think in a lot of these conversations, we try to pivot between what is the responsibility of Sacramento and what is the responsibility of local government. I think the homeless issue is beyond the capacity of local government. I think Sacramento needs to take this on very directly. And all one has to do is crack open a history book and read, and it wasn't that many decades ago that the state of California, Agnew's Developmental Center had 2 campuses. One is where the Rivermark community is now, and one of our schools is there, Don College on Middle School, K through 8. And then, of course, the other Agnes campus is where we're building 3 new schools now. But the point I'm making is there was a time in this state where Sacramento took on the responsibility for those that had substance abuse or mental issues or other health issues of that type. When we discuss the navigation centers, they're very innovative. I support them. but they only work for those who have the capacity to leverage it to their good. If you have substance abuse, if you have some mental incapacity or issue, you're not going to leverage a navigation center to a good outcome for yourself. So this really requires, this is something Sacramento used to do, it should do it again.
Thank you. Next audience question. This is about upcoding. Where is the issue best resolved? At the city, county, or state level, and why? We'll start with Mr. Brunton. Upcoding.
Upzoning.
I guess upzoning.
That's what SB 50 is
Upcoding,
all
though.
about, is upzoning. Yeah,
So, okay, so that's what, okay, so.
yeah, that's SB 50.
Well, upzoning would densify the law.
It, well, the bill didn't pass.
So it's asking, where is the issue of upcoding best resolved? So city, county, or state level,
City level.
and why?
Land use is primarily a city, and maybe some regional talk, but it is a city issue.
Okay.
So while I agree that ordinances belong to city level and county level, as I said earlier, there's a role for the state legislature to play. And as SB 50, as an example, might not have passed, I think it's going to come back in a different form, maybe a little more perfected. And the perfection is at a state level. To prevent, for example, gentrification or displacement of the population that are already living there, state can provide guidelines and also implement some practical laws to make sure that the housing is not just built for the high-cost, fancy housing, but there's a mixture of publicly funded housing that could promote coexisting and co-mingling. So I think there's a variety of levels that different issues can be played at the city, county, and the state as well.
So importantly, SB 50 does talk about localizing community involvement in sensitive communities for implementing SB 50 and is definitely taking this aspect of the discussion into accord when you talk about the actual practical process, right, of getting these decisions approved and passed. Now, it's my belief that at the state level, we have to set the overarching priorities and the moral imperative. We have to be aligned with the cities in how that gets done. And cities all across California, they recognize that this is a problem. They have their objections that are going to be resolved on a case-by-case basis. As legislators on the state level, we have an obligation to ensure that we're giving all the support we can to facilitate that decision and make the best leeway possible to allow for a resolution of their local issue.
When you look at SB 50 and even its predecessor, SB 827, the issues that, when you dig into the law, the issues that I have with it are, for example, a couple of examples. It allows you to build a high-density structure with no parking, with nothing put towards waiving developer fees completely, so there's nothing put towards infrastructure. Again, police, fire, water, utilities, open space, parks, schools, transportation. None of those things are funded. And then also, along with it, you have the notion that you could even be in a traditional subdivision, and if you're within, I believe it's a quarter to a half a mile of either a transit location or a high, it refers in the language of SB 50, a high-use bus stop, your neighbor across the street could sell their home to a developer. They would knock down their single-family dwelling and put up a mid-rise apartment complex. Again, you think of a traditional neighborhood and parking issues in a traditional neighborhood. Imagine that concept, that your neighbor across the street now has this increased parking issue because it's now a mid-rise multi-dwelling. I think SB 50, I'm grateful for it in the sense that it's starting a very critical conversation that we need to be a part of, without question. But truly, if the bottom line here is housing production, we need to do the hard thing. We need to do the difficult thing. We need to talk about modernizing CEQA.
So I like how this question became an SB 50 question again, but although I'll have to say a quick note is I thought the first questions of speed round were from the audience, so I'm disappointed no one wanted to know my favorite ice cream place in the audience. But so when we talk about upzoning, right, I think a senator put it really well when he came to SB 3 and SB 50 is that not every community should have the same change, but every community must have change. Now, a very fascinating proposal, so I won't just talk about SB 50 though, is in Oregon, right? They passed banning single-family housing entirely, right? And the interesting thing about SB 50, which I tell everyone, is interestingly, look, 94% of San Jose, the biggest city in our county, is single-family, right? For even a private developer to build a monstrosity tower, they would have to buy a lot of the parcels one by one, and we knowing the economic situation we're in, it would take at least 50 years. I live right next to a light rail station in a suburb. It would take probably like 100 years to even develop anything like the density that we need to, because they would have to buy every single home and get there, right? So I think the fears of SB 50 are a little overblown, honestly. But when it comes to zoning, the banning single-family housing is a very interesting concept. I don't know if I would legislate it because I want to see how Oregon will do it first, but every community does need to densify and need to be more efficient with their land use. The 1950s model of everyone with a green lawn, white picket fence, everything is outdated, and honestly is one of the big contributing factors to our climate crisis because our inefficient use of land. Buildings are, depending on how you cut it, the second biggest contributor to carbon emissions. And if we are more effective in how we use our space and more effective in how we do things, we will be better suited to tackle the climate crisis. And I'm more of a bigger fan of form-based zoning than use-based zoning like that. If you look at within history, right, in Asia and Europe and Africa, obviously, in the, how we built cities was around the form, right? We mixed all our uses together. And now suddenly in the 21st century, we're championing mixed use, but we've done that for thousands and thousands of years. We should be pushing everything closer together, the uses closer together, and that's how we really will make a sustainable community for the generations that come after us and far after that.
Thank you. Next audience question, and we'll start with Ms. Sung here. Why do we not look at what other states' solutions are for traffic?
That's an interesting question after Alex's response. And so I would coattail that answer as well. So Oregon, has passed the ban on single-family building, and I think it's an interesting idea in that it applies to certain areas of our probably more dense urban area of California, but California still has room in other areas that we could probably afford to still build single homes. So I'm not ready to say that I'm supportive of bills such that Oregon has done, but something that is a compromise in looking in certain areas of calling for bans of single-family homes in the areas that are highly concentrated. I don't think we can afford to build Santa Clara homes with big yards anymore, but there are still California areas that we could still do that in outskirts.
Thank you.
Could you repeat the question?
Yes. Why do we not look at what other states' solutions are for traffic? Yes, traffic.
Well, what I can say is that in California, there is sort of a unique situation where there is a tremendous public willingness to expand mass transit, but we seem to have a huge bureaucratic machinery in getting there and really solving the problem of truly congested highways and absolute inefficiency in getting our transit infrastructure passed through. In fact, right now locally, you're seeing that we're closing down transit, connections across our city. You saw the close down, for example, of Route 65, connecting so many of our elderly and our disabled to the downtown area as a bus they could take every day. So what we have to champion right here in California is a transit policy that is smart, that expands the use of bus in cities as not only a very cost-effective measure to really erode at some of our car culture and flipping that narrative around, but also something that is going to help the most vulnerable communities get access to jobs, to affordable housing, et cetera, right? And the second measure is that we have to follow through on getting every metropolitan city of our state connected to Caltrain by 2030. The climate crisis is not going to wait for us. This is a huge part of tackling the emissions problem, and that is why we need to make it a statewide priority.
And when it comes to transportation, what we really do need to remember is it needs to be integrated, because oftentimes you hear kind of an either-or argument, mass transit or improve the highway system. But when you look at the people who live in Silicon Valley, the reality is not either or. You have a lot of people who will drive their car to a BART parking lot, get on BART, take with them a little fold-out commuter bike. When they reach the city, they unfold it, get on that commuter bike, and ride to their office. So we're taking multiple ways and combining them to get where we're going. It's not just one thing or another. It's not either or. Plus, technology keeps racing forward. I mean, we see the electric cars now that are on the road, the Teslas. We see the fuel cell cars that are now coming on the road, that they only emit water vapor. What's the reality of how we live? In Silicon Valley, you may have your home in Sunnyvale but work in San Jose. But you look at 237 and what a mess that is. What a mess 237 is. And to me, that's a testament that regional planning is not happening. It's not occurring. Because you have multiple cities that are all along 237, Milpitas, North San Jose, North Santa Clara, Sunnyvale, Mountain View. They are not working together regionally on anything that they're doing. And 237 is a testament to that failure. That's where Sacramento can step in. Sacramento needs to step in and get all of these stakeholders around the table and have them work together regionally. But transportation needs to be integrated. It needs to be plug and play. It needs to all fit together. I'm a cyclist. I love riding. That needs to be a part of the mix. It needs to be all of the above.
Thank you.
Yeah, so why doesn't California look at other states for traffic solutions? Well, I do think we do, and other states are also looking at us, but we can learn a lot just from our own history. So, I mean, 50, 60 years ago, I wasn't obviously alive then, but, you know, the fossil fuel industry and the car industry, they ripped up our streetcars, they ripped up our rail lines, and they made it so that our transportation system doesn't move people. It moves cars, and that is the exclusive function of our roadways. And there's no wonder today we have the kind of traffic and the kind of problems we have, is because we failed to learn from our own good track record. If we had stayed the course for transit, just like other countries in the 20th century in Asia and in Europe have figured out, then we would have been in a much better place than we are today. And funny enough, to learn from the California example, we have not done a very good job of delivering to the voters as they approved the high-speed rail project to connect the entire state. So in fact, funny enough, now Texas is looking at doing something of the sort to combine their metropolitan areas, and it would be a real shame if a red state like Texas got on the train of high-speed rail before we did. You know, so we have to constantly be looking at regional planning with all our stakeholders, but we have to evolve beyond the narrative of just, we have to fix the roads, we have to fix the highway. What we need to do is to fix our transportation system, to get people to the places they need to be. Most traffic in the Bay Area is just point A to point B. You're commuting to work, commuting to school, etc. If we can get all those people who are in single occupancy vehicles off the road and through efficient, seamless transit system, then we can really solve the transportation problem. And so that's why I'm going to be pushing for a seamless Bay Area kind of traffic system, funding it properly, and having real aggressive expansion.
Thank you.
Mass transit should be organized for the benefit of the rider and respect for the taxpayer. Currently, mass transit in this area is organized for the benefit of the bureaucracies and for the profit of the vendors to the mass transit agencies. Sometimes when you look at the amount of cash flow that goes through the transit agencies, the amount of the vendors who make money off it instead of improving ridership, we should learn a lot of things from a lot of different people. You've heard me talk. We have 24 mass transit agencies. They don't work well together, and only 2 have elected boards. We need fewer agencies and more accountability. VTA is definitely ripe for accountability. Should be an elected board. Should be maybe merged with Caltrain. Probably should just maybe have 2 or 3 agencies with a very regional approach, because we're never going to fix these problems unless they talk about it in a regional way. We can learn from other people. We talk about sales tax reform. This came from my father, of all places. He was city manager of Phoenix, Arizona. He got Tempe and Scottsdale to start sharing some of their sales tax because Phoenix had to take care of low-income housing with the largest Habitat for Humanity projects. So we can learn how to get our cities to work together. High-speed rail is now working in Florida. They were having a very complicated program, but they finally decided, let's just connect Orlando to Fort Lauderdale. We can make it make sense. And they're talking about doing a high-speed rail junction apparently down in Victorville going to Las Vegas on a private sector basis. The point here is we definitely need to learn from other people. We should learn from other people, and we need to be more respectful and honest. You know, they've been talking about BART going to Milpitas for a long time, and they never seem to admit that they're late. They never seem to admit they're over budget. They never admit when they're going over. And frankly, you folks here in Santa Clara, you have no vote on the BART board. And I think that's crazy, that you're getting all this amount of money being spent, and it's being managed by VTA. And they're also kind of dumbing down BART by trying to do this single tunnel through downtown San Jose. So, point is, we should have fewer mass transit agencies. They should be more accountable to the people, and we should improve our ridership, and our pay should be based upon how well riders increase and how well they're happy.
Could I add a few words, because I didn't understand your question?
As long as it's 10 seconds.
Yeah, okay. So
Okay.
I'm going to repeat what I said previously. The desire was there on my part as a consumer. From Santa Clara to Berkeley, I looked into public transit, and it was just not feasible cost-wise and the time that it took. Our rapid transit is not rapid compared to other states or other countries. We can do better.
Thank you. I want to ask a question quickly to Mr. Canova here. There was one that was just for you, and it says, Jim, you talked about the importance of building infrastructure with housing. What are the infrastructures we lack and need in cities?
My experience is North San Jose, that's my home. So I live very close to the Levi Stadium, very close to the Ag News property where we're building our new schools near the Cisco campus. And what we've experienced there, number one, two parts. I talked about the redevelopment agencies. We were starved in terms of resources by the San Jose Redevelopment Agency for decades, and it really affected our schools and all of our police, fire, and so forth for a long time. When you have something, I'll give the example of the 3 schools that we're building at Ag News. It's been a 15-year process. It shouldn't take 15 years to build new schools that are needed. They were needed 10 years ago, and it's taken us 15 years. We've had to go through not just a bureaucracy in Sacramento, but we've also had to deal with developers, where our conversation started at the beginning of the 15 years was around developer fees, and we had pushback. Then we went into a recession. But nonetheless, over the 15 years, the voters supported us through 2 bonds that helped us acquire the land, and then now we have the resources to build the schools. But the point I'm making is, if a school district has to go through all that trouble and all that effort to build schools, which is that's part of our infrastructure, imagine what's going on with water utilities, police, fire, open space, transportation. All of these things are being impacted in a similar fashion. So my thinking in terms of building, in terms of truly smart growth, has to incorporate those infrastructure pieces. You need, in Silicon Valley, we're used to the phrase of plug and play with technology. We need to have a plug and play environment in terms of utilities. You don't build, North San Jose now has 40,000 more residents that have been brought in with the high density that was originally targeted for Coyote Valley. Coyote Valley pushed back, and then it was targeted at North San Jose on the First Street corridor in the Golden Triangle where I live. We have that growth. We have the 30 to 40,000 new citizens. They need schools, they need open space, they need parks, they need police, fire, utilities, transportation upgrades. Even light rail now is being maxed out. Light rail is being pushed to its limits because of the growth that we have. So,
I'm sorry to interrupt. If you could wrap up.
Yes. Infrastructure first, infrastructure first, infrastructure first.
Thank you. And I want to thank everybody. We actually had several more questions, but we've run out of time. So we'll be sure that the candidates receive these questions and that everybody gets the responses over email. So thank you so much, everybody. We are going to close with our candidates' closing remarks. Everybody will have 1 minute for this part, and we are going to start with Ms. Gupta.
I think today's housing debate is really highlighting a greater need for us to champion a debate about what does it mean to be an inclusive California. Our state has always championed a culture of inclusion in every sense of the word, not just housing, but of various socioeconomic backgrounds, of various professional backgrounds. And if we're going to have a critical conversation about the housing debate, it's also a critical conversation for how you're going to build your communities. How are you going to work with the industries that are already there to build successful partnerships in community development? And how are we going to make sure Sacramento works for us in a common sense way?
Thank you.
I was hoping we were going to get our favorite flavor of ice cream at the end. But what I wanted to say was, obviously, the affordability issue is so important. We talked about so many facets to this conversation that we hear really in every quarter politically. What I want to interject into this conversation, and I said it at the front end, is affordability also means our capacity to afford. Career tech education is essential in this state. It makes a difference. It gives people the capacity to afford more. We have students that come to our campus who are bored out of their mind at high school. They come to our campus, they find their niche, they find their passion, they come back, they're making six-figure incomes, they're creating businesses, they're hiring people, they're going on to college and opening up new chapters in their life. So when we talk about affordability, we need to look at it in a very complete way. That it's not, a lot of this conversation kind of paints a very dark future of diminishing returns. I don't see that dark future of diminishing returns. I shake the hands of high school graduates every year. That is the payoff of serving on a K-12 school district governing board. When you shake the hands of those students and you look in their eyes, I know the future's bright. I know the future's expanding. It's a positive place that is ahead of us. We do not have diminishing returns. I do not see home ownership as being something of the past. I see that as still being part of the matrix. I see an expanding pie. I see expanding opportunities. We can address the affordability issue, and we can do it in a way that respects climate change. We can do it in a way that is very California and set an example for the rest of this country. Anybody that knows me will tell you I am an eternal optimist. I see the glass as half full. I always do. I'm wired that way. I don't see it as a dark future. I see it as a positive future.
Thank you.
So we've heard today a lot of different visions and perspective on the housing crisis, but I can tell you, as a legislative staff reformer for the Senate and then the Assembly, we need someone who will be unabashedly progressive and push the envelope when it comes to these issues. We saw how difficult it is to pass 1482. We see how difficult it is to pass SB 50. We need more people who will go to bat for housing, because the housing crisis is not something we can wait. It is a crisis 50 plus years in the making, and it is for our generation and generations after me that we have to inherit this mess, right? The idea of home ownership, much less renting, is already difficult enough for a lot of people my generation, and especially the working class families of Assembly District 25. So we need a legislator up there who will join the ranks of pro-housing, yes in my backyard, let's build it the public way, and not rely on the status quo, because the status quo is clearly failing to deliver affordable housing units. Like I said, Fremont has met 18% of its low-income housing, San Jose 14%, but respectively they had 227% for market rate and 84% for their market. So we need someone who will be an unabashed progressive on these policy issue areas, and who better to navigate that than a former legislative staffer. And I'll close by saying I have a lot of thoughts about the housing crisis, so visit at votealexlee.com or at votealexlee 2020 on Twitter, or at votealexlee on Instagram. Thank you.
Thank you for putting this on. And, you know, we may all Canson chew a little bit of favor by him not running for re-election and now open it up for all of us to run for office, even though I had planned to run on this for 3 months ago before he decided not to run. Because what's important, I hope this is not the last time that all of us get together to talk about big issues facing our state. In the last 2 election cycles, there were no debates like this. And that's really important, at the very least. I'll come to anything that's invited. And I hope, so if you don't see me at one event, I wasn't invited. So some of you look out for me, will you, please? I often get ignored. So, but let me tell you in closing what I'm trying to do here for you. The core element of my campaign is about love, tough love. You know, I remember when my father took me camping for the first time, and he said, son, look at this campsite. And when we leave, it should be in the same condition or better than we found it. And I can tell you right now, we are leaving a mess behind for the younger people. And part of the reason why I want to go to Sacramento now is to help fix our state, prepare our state for a better future for our kids and a future. We have a huge amount of debt, and we need to because our unlimited needs with our limited resources are all being sucked up by a lot of interest on our debt. We can get a lot of control. We can get a lot more money to our citizens if we can get our debt under control and cut our government waste. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Anna Song. I'm running for Assembly District 25, and it's the toughest thing I've ever done. To stand in front of an audience and to explain and to try to convince you why you should vote for me is the toughest thing I've ever done, then having run for school board, county board of education. I've been endorsed by California Teachers Association, California Federation of Teachers, and assembly members that were mentioned today, Assemblymember Ting and Assemblymember David Chu as well. But the biggest endorsement comes from my two sons, 17-year-old and 13-year-old. They've seen me as a County Board of Education trustee for their lifetime. So I asked him, what do you see in me? Why do you support Mom running for assembly? And the older one said, Mom, you've asked tough questions, you get to their intention of the people, and you give them hell. And the second one, 13-year-old, said, Mom, you make connections with people. You don't just spew off words, but you connect with people. And that's why I'm running. It's tough raising two boys in Silicon Valley. It's tough being a single mom. It's tough advocating for public education. And I'm going to take that voice to Sacramento. Again, my name is Anna Song. Thank you for having me tonight.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to all the candidates for showing up tonight and for all of the great answers. It was so great to have you. We really appreciate it. And I just want to thank the audience as well for being here. Have a great night and drive safely. Thank you.